We know in ancient times, the witch doctors in every culture would tell people, because they would have the math to know when there was an eclipse coming, because they kept records, that, oh, you've angered people, that the snake god or the dragon god is going to eat the sun. And then when the sun disappeared, they would think that the priests were actually in contact with God and would give them more and more power. So they used superstition to control people. The Aztecs, all the ancient cultures did it. So now we see Homeland Security and the National Guard and the State Guard and all these states declaring emergencies over it and all this fear-mongering and be safe when you're out there and oh my God, what's going to happen? And they're getting ready to try to bring in martial law with civil unrest around the election or if Trump gets elected when he's president-elect. They've already said they're going to do it. The Democrats have war-gamed it. They're doing it in plain view. It's insane. And so all this is a dress rehearsal, not, oh, let's have a martial law drill with all the local counties, cities, states through the feds in a unified command drill. Let's not say it's for terrorism or a cyber attack or a nuclear war. Let's tell them it's because of the... So there's your live show headline, Emergency Wednesday broadcast, Biden administration using total solar eclipse as cover to run nationwide martial law drill ahead of election. So everybody's been asking me for a month, and I mean doctors and prominent lawyers. And when I was in a family court thing a month ago, I had one of the clerks, one of the courts come over and go, hey, Alex, I'm a big listener. What's going on with the solar eclipse? And second to that is the red heifer thing. I got asked about the red heifer 3 or 4 times yesterday. So I can't pump gas without hearing about the solar eclipse or the red heifer. I know what's going on with the red heifer. I'm going to do a show on that, or a couple segments on that tomorrow, I promise. But on the solar eclipse, total solar eclipse, there are total solar eclipses over different parts of the United States and different parts of the globe happening every year or so on average. There was just one last year. And it wasn't total over Texas, but it was total over some of the other states. It was about a 90%. And it's really cool because everybody likes to wear special glasses or poke a hole in a box, like a shoebox, and then it shoots through, the light does, and then makes an image of the sun that's safe to look at. You can watch the moon in front of the sun and the transit. And I didn't have X then, my wife did, but I put some photos I took up on my wife's X if you want to go see that. And we know in ancient times, the witch doctors in every culture would tell people, because they would have the math to know when there was an eclipse coming, because they kept records, that, oh, you've angered people, that the snake god or the dragon god is going to eat the sun. And then when the sun disappeared, they would think that the priests were actually in contact with God and would give them more and more power. So they used superstition to control people. The Aztecs, all the ancient cultures did it. So now we see Homeland Security and the National Guard and the State Guard and all these states declaring emergencies over it and all this fear-mongering and be safe when you're out there and oh my God, what's going to happen? And they're getting ready to try to bring in martial law with civil unrest around the election or if Trump gets elected when he's president-elect. They've already said they're going to do it. The Democrats have war-gamed it. They're doing it in plain view. It's insane. And so all this is a dress rehearsal, not, oh, let's have a martial law drill with all the local counties, cities, states through the feds in a unified command drill. Let's not say it's for terrorism or a cyber attack or a nuclear war. Let's tell them it's because of the eclipse. Well, no governments in modern times, as we stop practicing voodoo, have ever acted like this for a solar eclipse. So people go, what's going to happen? Are aliens going to invade? Or what are they going to do during the eclipse? You might have some crazy people that, like when Hale Bopp came by, that killed themselves because they thought a transgender cult famously killed themselves, and wearing their Nike tracksuits and drinking their vodka and taking barbiturates and getting in their beds to send their spirits up to the spaceship they said was following the tail of the comet. So you might have some weirdo groups kill somebody or kill themselves or do something stupid, because every time something gets hyped, the crazies attach themselves to it. But there is zero reason for all of this other than the government trying to scare people and create fear, but that's secondary, and promote mumbo jumbo. But what it is, because I've got all the articles and all the documents right here, is a martial law drill. So this is a test of the Obama kill switch, of martial law, of a government takeover of communications, and it's a test getting all the local governments at one time to be unified under Homeland Security. Overhead shot, please. So here is the track of the eclipse when the moon will block out the sun because they are lined up. Kind of like you put your hand in front of a flashlight in the dark and suddenly you can't see the beam. Maybe it shoots through your hand, maybe your hand glows red, but you're in a closet, you turn on the flashlight, you can see, you put your hand over it, you can't see. So it's simple. The moon goes in front of the sun. I know the audience knows this, but some Democrats are listening and may not. And you cover up the light source. That's all this is. And so all over the country, they're declaring civil emergency, even in states that will barely even see it, because you only see it in a small track that comes in by some of the resorts down there in southern western Mexico, Puerto Vallarta, and then it goes right up through the middle of Mexico, right up through Texas, South Texas, right over Central Texas, right over East Texas, right over us in Austin, right over my parents' ranch in East Texas, and then goes on out over the Midwest and then into the East, and then tracks out over Maine, and then goes out over the Atlantic Ocean. So this is nothing, and it won't even be totally dark. But the birds start singing again like they're about to go to sleep. The birds start getting in the trees, and then it's this eerie, beautiful sky. It was blue skies one they had last year that was almost total, and it was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, and magical, and cool, and had nothing to do with the end of the world, nothing to do with all of this ridiculous fear-mongering going on. And so now we know exactly why it's being done. Here's some headlines. National Guard will be deployed for total solar eclipse on April 8th. National Guard, this is Newsweek, be deployed for solar eclipse. Solar Eclipse Summit ties state, local plans together. This is what it's all about. This is a martial law drill. That's what a civil emergency is they suspend normal stuff. This is martial law. This is taking the gun off safety. Department of Health, Homeland Security urged safe viewing of April 8th eclipse. So that's the crowd that wears their mask indoors or whatever. It's everything's scary. Everything's nanny state. Everything's evil. The government will protect you. Solar eclipse. Hospitals prepare for emergency disaster as thousands across the U.S. stargaze. Is there an emergency for the 150,000 that died last year of fentanyl? And the 500,000 that overdosed and almost died or more? No, that's not an emergency. But this isn't going to cause one death. It's not like you flip the lights off and then you're suddenly in the dark. It's slowly, over 30, 40 minutes, darkens, and then it looks like twilight, and then it turns back on. It's like a dimmer in your house. So it's like you slowly, over 45 minutes, dim the lights, and then over the next 45 minutes, you slowly turn the lights back on. And the government is saying, oh my God, we've got the military on standby. How about you send the military to the border to actually arrest illegal aliens? That's the crisis. How New York State officials are preparing for the solar eclipse, declaring an emergency. FAA issues warning ahead of April 8th total solar eclipse. And it goes on and on. Here's Austin declaring an emergency. Oh no. So that's what they're doing. It's just more get you ready for martial law, just like the lockdowns and all that they now admit are for carbon lockdowns, greenhouse gas lockdowns that they want to roll out. They've already tested in India where, oh, you can't use your car today. You're like, I'll still use it. Oh, really? We got kill switches in all the new ones now. That's what the technocracy is really all about.
Here we are back. We're working hard. We're doing our best over here, guys. So I hope you guys will support us. Hope you'll reach out, do the effort to connect and to do the feedback and hit us with some resources on Cash App or whatever you can do. So I have to say, not to try to channel John Hagee over here, but it seems absolutely clear to me and certain that these confluence of events across the world stage and the arrival of this technological singularity point, whereby which everyone is kind of a node, a biological node within the machinery and within the network automation of a single cybernetic global network, right? So that gives the preponderance of power that is a fantasy of totalitarians throughout time in history have sought to find mechanisms by which they could control the people and affect their tyranny more productively, right? Just how these eugenicists and these fascists and corporatists of old, right? So we're seeing just a new level of control with these central bank cryptocurrencies and digital currencies, and the idea that the central banks and the money masters and the lords of the international banking combinations and that whole complex, which is almost a national sovereignty, right? It's a world power and almost an economic monolith all on its own. And these individuals, of course, are trying to capitalize and take full advantage of the arrival of the possibility of electronic currencies and the affordability and massive wealth generation capabilities that are coming with that. But I think you can see that a new age of the serialization of the human soul is birthing here. And you can see they have no interest in allowing for any kind of possibility of dissent or wrongthink. And the whole process of digitalizing money will, of course, produce a new level of corporatist fascism and the potential for harm and violations to such a great extent that we'll need a super intelligent AI to sort out what all the ramifications and dangers could really be. And they like to present the whole edifice of digital currencies by the central bank, right? These are just like Bitcoin or just some other independent ventures that put forward the components and the capital in order to bring about a cryptocurrency, a crypto coin, right? A digital currency. But these individuals want to remove the privatization of the space altogether and get rid of Monero or Bitcoin or Doge or all the other cryptocurrencies you might have heard of before and just take over the entire space and run the entire world through the auspices and the ubiquitous universal power of the digital control that it would give them over all of our lives. Every single biological node, every single human node that wants to interact financially would have to ultimately, the privacy and the simplicity of bearer bonds, the idea of bearer bonds or money notes or dollar bills of exchange that can exchange intrinsically as a separate article between individuals, or it could be lost out of your pocket and disappear, right? Because it's its own article, it's its own thing. Now there would be no thing. It would just be the accounting and the abacus and the reckoning of this central bank adversary that, of course, you Jew haters out there will say, it's the Jews. But of course we know that the Jews have been under the constant, relentless persecution as they've had to, throughout history, be reborn again and again and again as they have to flee from the ashes of one persecution or annihilation or pogrom or Stalinist Holocaust or Holodomor or whatever, right? The The Jews have been, of course, that almost preternatural evil and specter of violence and purposeful constant annihilation that's directed at the Jewish people in all the different facets and places and tribes and peoples and languages and places and different melanin content. You can see that the various different people of Israel all over the world who have taken part and remembered their prayers and their books of the Tanakh and remembered the Testaments and remembered constantly their Sabbath and remembered, the ways of God all over the world, in Ethiopia, everywhere you go. You can find these remnant people, these Israelite, Jewish, Hebrew people everywhere. And far be it from us to try to critically break down their bloodlines or their family traditions or the heritages from history, from time immemorial, because what do we know? The oldest guy that we have around here is like 100-something years old, right? He'll die and pass to the Lord soon, and then the living memory of him will be gone too. And we're all just getting younger and younger and more childish and more immature as we go here, right? And the same thing with the childish little boy, pederast, Epstein Island visitor 36 times. Bill Gates, what a total degenerate little boy, right? Who never grew up. That's what happens when you grow these little boys up. You keep them at the age of 8 all the way until they're in their 20s, and they're trying to plan how they can annihilate the world with their perverted friends in their garage of their parents, right? So these degenerates have immature, sycophant little, pathetic little pigs. It's a whole generation of them. These elitists, the Silicon Valley posers, right? The pretenders to power get down and they bow low and they scrape. And they deign to stoop quite deeply into their curtsy when they bow to the power to kiss the ring, right? Because they're genuflectors, and they're just going to do whatever it takes to get their next bump and the next pay range, get the next percent of the next stock rollout or whatever, right? I mean, these people are they're not the survivable type. They're not in the survivable conditions. There's not a future world where their Lamborghinis and all the things they've invested their money in have any kind of real meaning or value or any. So, I mean, I'm rooting for everyone through this time. A lot of these guys are going to dig down in their deep underground military bunker kits and try to survive, with their caches of supplies and stuff that they've, gathered up for themselves. And many, many, many more of us are going to have to try to survive up here on the surface. A fool's errand, a difficult gauntlet of horrors. As far as the elites are looking at it, as far as the documents and the different white papers and the different projections of how they're going to arrive at these depopulation numbers are staggering. What events are going to be caused to trigger all this death, right? And you can see that the pressure points and the little powder kegs are already set to go, man. Where you have a masterfully overdone commercial real estate market here in the United States that's going to lead to these massive bank foreclosures. I guess you guys just didn't get the memo yet, or the journalists and the reporters with all their prizes and dignities haven't had the courage to find their gonads to report on what's happening out there yet, or like I said, the generations are just passing away, and the living knowledge and the actual experience with which one might be able to approach some of these issues, it's probably just not there. You just have more and more ignorant twits being churned out of the universities with no education, with miseducation and diseducation, right? These individuals are just so ignorant that it's scary as to how we should look forward to America's productivity and growth and actual ability to perform the vaunted principles by which we have stood as far as the freedom of the press. I mean, what press? These people are all like sycophant, mockingbird, CIA, like corporate deviants and traitors. It's all just traitor speak. And positioning in the past, the positioning was, we always would take note of the positioning of the elites, of certain individual people of note who were globalist leaders, who were powerful banking lords who happened to be court Jews or follow-on sycophants and kind of the paid clerks and the servant boys of the ancient and impervious masters of global power, which has always been these unknown family empires and dynasties that have been rooted into in history for many thousands of years. You got to remember, even the recent edition of the Templar Knights, and it was year 1000, and they ran their course until the 1300s. But these family lines, who would send their sons to become these new, highly advanced and technologically equipped warriors who were going to be the Templar Knights. The families who would send their secondary and third sons were of a royal nobility and a titular royalty and headings and with titles and pedigrees that go back to the Roman Empire. And that's how these individuals look at it. That's how a lot of these black nobility, the Colonnas, the Aldobrandinis, the Sforzas, right? The Medici, the Orsini, the Pallavicini, right? Those are names of families you guys don't ever hear about. That's who the bank clerk boys over at the City of London, that's who they all are really working for, guys. Who do you think goes and puts all their money in those banks? What is the significance of the secret square mile of the banking secret quarter of the inner city of London? What's the point? The point is that they have their own rules. The monarch of the UK, of England, has to go and touch their sword and kiss their ring when he comes in their area. And what's the significance of it is that that's where those individuals put their money. And those banks are the servants and the corporate subordinates of their customers. Because you know who the king is? The customer is always the king, guys. It's not the banks, it's the banking customers there. And so that's what we have to point out to you, is that this papal nobility is broken up into this white nobility and black nobility. And the white nobility is the one out there that you all see at your United Nations meetings and all of your tabloids. But the black nobility in the background are the ones who are not seen and you don't know about and you're not familiar with. So I'm just tired of you guys picking on the Jews and even picking on the Rothschilds, the newly formed made men, the Red Shield clan, who was the Bowers, right? The Bauer family. Don't pick on them. Well, they're really disgusting reptiles from UFOs, and they're hitting us with signals from space that who knows what you guys are really. It's not even a joke. You're really wearing aluminum foil hats right now. But the point is that these individuals are just family lines who have been doing what their ancestors have been doing before them. And if you're going to go and have a bone to pick with this whole situation and the whole prevailing evil of it and the whole demonstrable prevailing tyranny and ubiquitous kind of cyber totalitarian program that's descending on us, you're not going to be able to just go ahead and pick on the Jews and pick on the Rothschild families or whoever, or the Soros even. I think I recently was challenging Alex Soros to an MMA match, right? But in the end, I'll give him a fair fight, and I'm not picking on him because of his heredity or because he, maybe he has Jewish blood in his background or whatever. I have no idea. That's really beside the point. People who are scumbags are people who are scumbags. It doesn't matter what caliber or color or, extract or religious persuasion or whatever they might come from. So you individuals are having a problem with certain individual bankers, and then you're leaving out all the rest of the individuals who are suspect there. You're protecting the black nobility by picking on the Jew clerks, the Rothschild banking employees of the black nobility, right? You're just picking on the waitstaff. You're punching down. Why don't you go pick on the big families? Why don't you go pick on the overarching monolithic structure itself? Why don't you go pick on the papal nobility instead of picking on the little bank employees over there? That's like going into Burger King and having a problem with Burger King and just punching the employee wearing the fast food hat, that's at the register, and just punching them right in the face because you have a problem with the entire corporation. Now, why don't you be a big boy or a big girl or whatever you are and go and name the whole thing and stop protecting your own religious interests? Right? Because most of you guys out there breathing this anti-Semitic tropes and all this hatred and Jew hate are Roman Catholics you got your rosaries out. Like some kind of magical laser is going to come out and defend you. And you know what? If that makes you feel better, go do it, man. But you know what? Your particular anti-Semitic and irrational hatred of the people of Israel, the roosters are going to come home and roost on that. Because I'm telling you right now, you pretend like you have the religion of Jesus Christ, but you betray him and you betray his people, and you follow on and push on these pogroms. Just like those crusaders did back in the day. Always with the Jew hate, always with the burning of the Jewish villages, always with the killing and the murder and the pogroms of the Jews before you go off to go and try to get annihilated by the Muslims. And the fight for the Crusades. How'd that go, guys? That's what this is all about. That's all this triangulation, all this sinister undermining, right? The undercurrents of covert clandestine forces. You can feel it rearranging the geopolitical atmosphere and trying to rearrange the pieces on the board. And they just want their Temple Mount, guys. They don't want the Jews to have it. That's the dialectic. They don't want the Muslims or the Palestinians or whatever they are. They don't want them to have it. They don't want a Jewish temple and a heifer, and they don't want a Muslim temple or whatever, right? They just want to put the Pope up there so he can walk in the area that is the temple of God, that is the God's area, and show himself that he can pretend that he's God and talk big. The beast can mouth these big words of defiance against God. That's what's going to happen. So let them build their thing. Let them have their weird Jesuit interfaith initiative where they do whatever they're going to do with God's mount and go up there and try to show out some kind of antichrist stuff. And we're going to see the tribulation, guys. The papacy, the Roman papacy is the antichrist. That's some other person, not Elon Musk, right? It's a very bizarre fellow really just an easy target to try to make him, that's how they did Hitler. The way you spell Hitler's name, all kinds of things would make Hitler the mark of the beast and Hitler the Antichrist, right? And they do the same thing. Of course, Elon Musk is feeding into it a little bit. He's a powerful man. He's one of the great kings of over his little principality and over his little fiefdom here on earth, right? One of the great men of the earth, the mighty men of the earth. That's what the Bible talks about. All the great and rich and kings and mighty men of the earth are all teamed up and churned up together, kicking up their heels against God. So here, guys, we're just going to do our best to just bring out as much information as we can and just reveal the same old truth that's always been there hidden. And we're walking here not by sight but by faith, and we're walking here with the Lord. We're going by the scriptures and by the tenets and precepts and doctrines of the old Christians of the way, right? Before all this Romanism and all this Saturnalia and all this weird Ishtar, right? This weird Ishtar practice of the moon, right? The moon counting the lunar cycles until Ishtar, and then doing the Easter that Sunday after, because Easter it's not Ishtar. No, it's like you go on Google and there's like 15,000 articles explaining to you why Ishtar and Easter are not the same thing. They're not related, right? It's bizarre. Like who spends that much energy on that? On a lie, except for the devil, right? The truth just comes through and easily, lightly, light as a feather, shatters all the weight and density and morass of the lies. It just shatters. The truth shatters it, guys. So that's what we're here. We're to bring you back to Passover, bring you back to the Lamb of God, who is the Lamb of the Passover, right? Jesus said, I am the Passover Lamb. He said that himself. So come away from Ishtar, guys, and Ishtar eggs and Ishtar bunnies, and come over here to the practice of Passover. Not because it's about Jews, right? The Jews just have a really good way of keeping the remembrance of it and keeping the calendar year after year, month after month. So that's why it's so important we go ahead and peek over their shoulder and see how they keep the days and keep the Moedim and keep the times of God. And we know what the Sabbath is. And we actually know what year it is. We know what time it is, because there's been so many extravagant and devastating upheavals of history. If it wasn't for the people of God, the Jewish people carrying on their calendar, we probably wouldn't know what time it was at all. So having said that, we are on the side of the people of Israel and the land, and them defending the land, and them getting good government and honest government and representative government in the land that's righteous until the time that Yeshua comes and the time of the Gentiles is over. Right? So it's about the scripture, guys. You guys don't know. I'm speaking over many of your heads because you just don't know anything. Go back down there and polish your pistol, or do whatever weirdo thing you do with your time that has meaning. But you'll have to go into the teachers and to the Bereans and to those who are keeping up with this stuff. Like this podcast, you'll have to come here to hear the truth and to find out the truth, because these other individuals, they don't know it. And if you don't know the truth, then you're a liar. Everything you're saying is a lie. Everything you do is askew, right? Everything you're doing is debased because you're not standing or working or operating in the truth or in the knowledge of the truth. Some of these people have the truth, but they're operating against it. And I'm assuming that none of you would do that, because you know what will happen. You'll have to face the Lord, and you'll have to have accountability, and you have to become responsible with your soul for what you've done with your life. And that's what we're all going to do, guys. That's what this is. This is my kind of concern, is to carry forward and make sure that as a watchman on the wall, that I sound the alarm when the enemy is near, when the danger is there, and I'm not going to fall asleep, or I'm not going to be sold out or corrupted by the money of the enemy, right, or the temptation of the enemy to keep quiet and stand down and let my post fall, right, let my gate, my position at the tower fall. That's not going to happen. And so we pray for the people of Israel. We pray for the people that live there in that region of the area that they call Palestine, which is really just a falsehood. Because ultimately, back in the day, when David fought Goliath, David had to fight the Palestines, right, the Philistines. And that's where the word Palestine came from. It came from the Romans, of course. Roman emperors who were furious with Israel tried to salt the earth, burn the temple, destroy the place, and rename it. They renamed it in the name of their enemies, the Philistines, right? So we're not going to use that term with any serious dignity. It's an affront to God. It's an affront to history. If you don't know what you're even talking about, you actually wave the flag of the Philistines. We're on the side of David, King David. He was a young and princely man. He went down there and slung the rock and slung the stone. And by the power of the Holy Spirit, he killed Goliath and they killed the Philistines. That's what the Israelites did. And I'm on their side again. And I hope that they sling the stone, and I hope they kill their enemies, and I hope that Goliath falls dead.
So it was just absurd what they did.
Yes.
Everybody knows that too, and that was what's so funny. And there's so many things about this case you cannot talk about either. I mean, when you had deliberately these juries were in blue jurisdictions, and then there was almost a racist component to the way that Letitia James and Fannie Willis and Alvin Bragg campaigned for office. We're going to get Donald Trump and we're going to get him. And it became kind of a black thing. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to talk about it. But it was like the patois, the dialect, the whole idea was we've got street cred. We're going to get this big old white guy and we're going to really humiliate him. And nobody could talk about that except Trump. Remember, Trump kept saying it was racist. They were picking him out. But my point is this. Does Fannie Willis think right now, and does Alvin Bragg think right now, and does Letitia James think right now that if there was a major candidate running for office like Barack Obama, and he was a black man, and there was a white redneck prosecutor in Georgia, and he said something like he got a deal with Tony Resco. He wanted to expand his backyard. Tony Resco got a favorable vote from him in the legislature. And he paid half of market value. And he didn't list that as a gift. That's tax fraud. And we're going to go after him. If he was just a minor prosecutor from another state and kind of turned it into a federal, bootstrapped it into some type of federal RICO charge or something. Because that's what she's doing.
Yeah.
Or saying, he has a bank account in my church. Something like that. They would go nuts. They would say he's a racist. He's a white prosecutor going after a proud black man. That's what they would do. And so there's something going on, when you have all of these prosecutors, Bragg and Letitia James and Fannie Willis. It's not me who's talking about race, it's they are. Just take her trial, for example. She said, they asked her about Nick. I'm not going to talk about a proud black man. I'm not going to talk about him. Remember when they were trying to say about him, and then she said, you don't understand about cash. It's a black thing. Black people keep it.
That was her father, I think.
No, she said it.
Did she say it too?
Her father came, and then he reiterated. I thought, well, wait a minute. I know a lot of black people. I've never heard them say that their attitude toward cash was any different than anybody else. But again, it was that retreat to race. And the same thing with Fannie Willis when she was campaigning. And the same thing with Eric Adams. Remember, he campaigned, and when he was being criticized because of his pathetic administration, he turned and he said to the cameras, this is a chocolate city. Look at them. You see any white people? Remember he said that?
Yeah.
He pointed out, this is a chocolate city. And he ran on, I was the guy that went after the crackers. And what I'm getting at is that nobody wants to talk about this. Yeah. But we need to get back to content of your character, but there's a racial element of just furor here. And I don't, there's left-wing bias. We saw that with Engoron, and we'll see it with Jack Smith. But there's also a sense that this inner-city culture resents Donald Trump, and especially it's being guided by the bi-coastal left-wing elite, and they're going to go after him in a way that is gloating. We've never seen anybody like Letitia James. We've never really seen this before, where these prosecutors like Fannie Willis go into a church, a black church, and then announce that she's a victim of racism because she's lied under oath, or she's in a very dishonest fashion that is it's just not appropriate to hire her paramour and then to pay him this money and then to claim that she didn't really get anything free from him because she paid him back in cash. But whoops, she didn't have any money. And then to go in this money and then to claim that she didn't really get anything free from him because she paid him back in cash. But whoops, she didn't have any money. And then to go into church and say, anybody who questions my word is a racist. That's what she did. Yeah. So they bring up race all the time. And then you think, well, is this a motivating factor?
Yeah. It's not good for civilization, not when you've got multi-ethnic
It's not when you have 3 black prosecutors and most of all the prosecutors now in the major cities and the mayors are black, which is fine. That's a democratic, but we don't go by proportional representation. We always say, the official has to look like America. We always say that, we thought, and then repertory admissions or whatever appointments or profiles came into favor. So all of a sudden, there's not enough black coaches. They have to match the demography. But if the NBA or the NFL is overwhelmingly black, it's okay because of the historic discrimination against blacks. It means they're exempt as a group. And the same thing with, if you look at the mayors of, say, the largest 20 towns, or I should say cities in America, they tend to be mostly black. I understand their populations are minority majorities, but still. And the same thing with prosecutors. And this was George Soros who deliberately found radical prosecutors to run and then to fund them with $1 and $2 million. We had the same thing with the DA in Chicago that let Jesse Smollett off, and he was communicating with people that were connected with Juicy Smollett and Michelle Obama of all things. So this is something that we don't talk about, but everybody is, I think, upset about that these prosecutors are very racialized. They're not because of the color of their skin, but because culturally they feel that there's a racial edge to their prosecution. And again, that's not me saying it. It's Fannie Willis playing the race card again and again and again. It's Eric Adams as the mayor bringing race to the fore anytime he's criticized and bragging that there is no white people on his council. Or it's Letitia James campaigning in a way that to black audiences that she's going to get this guy and then she's going to gloat about how she's done it, and it's not healthy.
So now it's time for a word from our sponsor. And as you know, our sponsor is courageously helping us to keep our show going here. So it's wendyslimited.com. wendyslimited.com. So wendyslimited.com. wendyslimited.com has all the hottest new styles and couture trends and latest boutique women's apparel and shoes and heels and flats and all kinds of just wonderful stuff. You have Hives and Honey jewelry armoire. It's been a favorite lately. And we have, of course, Windsor crystal lamps. I have one in stock in particular that has been a favorite. So wendyslimited.com is always open to help you get everything you need. Awesome Prada purse that we saw that Wendy's Limited just put up. So we have to think who out there wants to get incredible Prada fashion couture. You know that from what I hear, they're a favorite of many, many ladies out there, many women all over the place. In fact, I think you cannot find a single family member or wife or sister or aunt or grandmother or loved one or girlfriend or what have you that does not love Prada purses. So if you want to be totally awesome, you have to eventually come to grips with wendyslimited.com. Wendy's Boutique Limited has all the hottest new styles and latest women's apparel, everything you need to be totally awesome. If you're a woman or if you have a woman who's someone that you love. And of course we all love women because they're just so awesome. That's why wendyslimited.com is so successful. So go check out Wendy's Boutique. wendyslimited.com is the only place to go. And we have to recommend, she's been totally 100% awesome to us and generous. So we are always going to be buying our jewelry, fine jewelry, gold and silver jewelry, and all of our best boutique, couture, and designer trends. We're going to go to wendyslimited.com. So check out Wendy's Boutique Limited.
So we fought very continuously and energetically, and we fought valiantly here, guys, to remind the world of the truth, get us in America, everyone here with the reasoning, thinking, critical mind, away from the barbarism and religio-cultic mysticism of Romanism, right? And back to where we belong in the biblical context and the scriptural doctrines and tenets by which we understand the entire foundation of our Christian belief in Jesus Christ as the Savior is established on this fact that Jesus Christ came into the city of Jerusalem on Passover. And on Passover, he had his legendary and epic struggle with Satan and with the world, with the rulers of Rome and the religious rulers of Israel who were not interested in discovering the truth, but only in just putting down anyone that maybe would threaten their ability to have this advantageous wealth-building alliance with Rome. Not disturbing the Pax Romana, right? That's what it was all about. And to reject their own Messiah. And so that event that we all understand to be the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ and his ultimate triumph and the moment of our greatest faith and wonder and the miraculous roots of our foundations of our Christian faith are in this event that took place on Passover. So we have to repudiate the rest of you who are taking part in this idolatry kind of lazily, willingly, without any kind of real thought being put into it. Just it's being presented. Joel Osteen's got the Easter bunnies out, right? Everyone's doing it. Everyone's participating in this Roman Catholic tradition of Easter, which of course is Egyptian and Babylonian sorcery, guys. It's just moon worship of the highest order. Like we said, you have to just look it up yourself. I know you guys are too lazy. You have smartphones, but the smartphone keeps you dumb, right? You don't have to actually do any of the work. You don't actually have to type in the words and check it out. But Easter is a fictitious, mythological, pagan ritual and pageantry that goes back to Babylon and Egypt and to Pythagoras, right? The Greeks would do things like this, and so would the Mithraic rituals. And the Druids would follow after this, right? And Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar, right? And all the enemies of God. And of course, even the Muslims have famously this Easter imagery of moon worship on their flag, right? That you guys are participating in. So I have to denounce it once again and remind you again to have courage, to have faith, and to be strong in the Lord and mighty, and to resist this evil and this iniquity that's in all these churches, right? And the Easter bunny goes along with the corporatized Christmas tree, Santa Claus deal. And some of you have children and you're going to participate in it and you're going to teach this stuff to your kids, and that's how it transmits from generation to generation. Some of us over here are going to resist and teach our kids the truth about the actual doctrine of Christianity and scriptural reality and the gospel of the truth, and we're going to defend the truth of the scriptures and teach our kids the truth, and we're going to do other things around this mockery and this hedonistic expression of paganism that only really the wealthy can participate in because it's for rich people, right? All the little kids around the world get a shoebox with some popcorn and an orange, right? So it's disgraceful, and of course people aren't used to hearing this kind of criticism because it's so deeply rooted in their soul because they were instilled with this kind of weird inculcation of Roman religiosity and Roman religio-cultic rites, right? Which was whatever, the religious rites, and they're practiced and prescribed at a certain time, just like how Muslims have to bow down 5 times a day and yada yada. So the Roman Catholics have their prescription of ritual practice they have to take part in. And so these American Christians are being herded and stampeded and deceived into this proximity of churchianity, which is got the symbols and the motif of Jesus Christ, but of course it leaves Jesus Christ far behind. So this is a perfect example this year when we're having Easter and Passover taking place in 2 completely separate months. And of course we know that Passover is firmly planted on the rock, right? It occurs in like our friend and the co-founder of our program here, Ed, was describing, happened on, I'm just going out of memory here, which is just getting hazy, but I think he said it was on Nissan 4, right? Nissan 4, right? Something like that. It's a specific day, that's my point. It's a very specific, immovable day on the Jewish calendar, which falls on our Gregorian American calendar, which we switched from the Julian calendar over to this Gregorian kind of Roman Catholic calendar. That's why we have all the gods of Rome as our months, right? Janus, god of Rome. January, right? It's pretty simple. March, Mars, god of war, right? June, right? That's a pretty easy one. And so it follows on that just the influence of ancient Roman culture and imperialism affects us even now in our time. But the point is that we know that Passover is celebrated by the Jews every single year since the time immemorial, since before the time of Christ, since several hundred years before the time of Christ, when the event of the liberation of the people of Israel out of Egypt by Moses, right, would be the first point in time when we would see the introduction of Passover in history. And it's been practiced ever since, and it's the exact day that Jesus comes into the city, and it's the day that we celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection of our Lord Jesus and Messiah and our King, Jesus Christ. And of course, you guys are all just celebrating it on a wrong day, on some kind of Babylonian ball worship kick, because the local churches and the Pope tells you to, right? The local papal sorcerers from Rome, the Roman magicians and soothsayers, right? They're over there in Rome looking up at the new moon and doing lunar magic, lunar sorcery, and determining the following Sunday when their mythical Ishtar practice will be conducted. And of course, you can go on Google and you can see 1,700 different articles that are going to tell you that Ishtar and Easter are just somehow not associated. But we have just told you repeatedly again and again that they're lying to you. And those are really complex and sophisticated lies. But historically, the reality has always been, since the 1400s and since history was invented, the reality is that these Roman pagan practices like Ishtar, which if you go back to the Greeks, I think they worshipped Astarte, right? Etc. We've already been through this, guys. And so we got to defend the truth here and remind you of that. And like the Bereans had, and like the teachers of the fivefold ministry have to remind the rest of the church what the truth of the gospel is. And you're terribly, terribly off base. You're terribly, terribly off course. You should stop participating. If the idea is to repent in this nation, like Nineveh, if the idea is to have this crying out of Jonah to the people, to have them repent to God, I think it's time that we remember our God. We remember the Moedim, which is the time and day of our God. We listen to the teachers who are reminding the pastors and these guys out here trying to study the prophets, and these individuals over here, who are practicing as apostles, right, in the church. These evangelists and missionaries traveling with all their energy around the world to go to these people that the Lord have put on your heart and to minister to them. We're trying to remind all of you of the absolute unmovable nature of the truth, and that Easter is not present there, and neither are Ramadan. Ramadan is not present there. I cannot have you go to a Buddhist temple and meditate to Buddha and tell you're going to find the oracle and truth of the gospel there either, because you shall not. You shall not. So that's what this effort has been. It's a continuous work, arranging through all the topics, through all the relative current events, the topics that are affecting our world now, and the conversations and the discussions, right, and the elucidation of true knowledge. And we have to break through this censorship blockade and this terribly destructive media embargo on the truth. We have to stop listening to these repetitive mantra and this enchantment of lies that this network of news anchors, disgustingly traitorous journals, like I guess they call themselves journalists, but they're just upholders of an entire culture of deception and lies. It's time for us to push back. So we're working hard, guys. I hope that as we approach this point where we're going to ultimately find America becoming subsumed and consumed by this religious idolatry, this Roman idolatry that we're apparently enthralled to, this inescapable quicksand and the mire of this third world war that has been set up. It seems like all the dominoes are falling, everything is falling into place for this systematic annihilation. All the ideological conditions are right? All the different propaganda instruments have been employed the weaponization of our academia, right, of our news media, of our entire system of industry and enterprise and business in this country is consumed by this avalanche of DEI, narcissistic and degenerate idea virus, right, that just causes the people, it's like some kind of like mass social navel gazing. And instead of inspiring us into this next level of mental self-awareness and intellectual awakening, we have this kind of sterilization of thought, this kind of like neutering and searing of any independent conscious judgment and reasoning, and just as we just see the entire populace, which was being dumbed down for generations anyway, being dumbed down in the old classroom there, as the affirmative action catastrophe really was implemented, and it was really the beginning of the end of any kind of institutional meritocracy or any actual value within our university system now, which seems to just replicate. Maybe there are some programs here and there, but by and large, it seems like going to university is just spending money to make yourself dumber, to empower the pharmaceutical, military, industrial complex against the people in Washington, D.C., against the people, and to develop these asinine pseudo-philosophical narratives to just so that the dumbed down people can have some shallow and obnoxious and erroneous pathology by which to pursue meaning in their life, right? So these individuals that are bringing America to this place of final destruction and this final civil war, right, on one hand, are escalating an ideological conflict within the freedoms and liberties that they are afforded in this country. Those wonderful treasures of dignity and human triumph and political liberty that you see afforded here in the United States are just instruments and weaponized advantages that these neo-Marxists and communist degenerates will willingly sacrifice and employ to not only see themselves destroyed in their radical and their narcissistic and radicalization, the psychopathy of it all, as long as it can somehow bring down millions of other unseen souls here in America, people that they'll never see or know. But as long as they can systematically and effectually ruin their lives, then of course they're all in, because they're psychopaths, right? We're just dealing with a high degree, a highly programmed army of psychopaths out here. And before it was behind the scenes and it didn't really affect America, but now all the perverts and degenerates and psychopaths, all the Antifa reprobates that are down there huffing glue in the park in the middle of the night and planning the overthrow of America, right? Their numbers used to be so minimal that they were just sidelined as fringe, but now they've gotten themselves substantially numerous that they are threatening America, and that their acolytes and their ideological kinsmen within the district attorney's offices and with the police forces and within the mayor, city councils, within representative committees within your state legislators' offices, right? There's a combination of these degenerates and traitors that are willing to destroy themselves in the pursuit. They're like their weird self-jihad, right? Their ultimate annihilation and destruction of their own selves is ultimately a murder-suicide, because they have to bring us all down with them. And so that's what's so sick about this. They can't just go over there and practice their own political or religious or private personal beliefs amongst themselves, right? They have to make sure that they wave their degenerate and sick, perverted. I mean, we can't really use the word sexual, because whatever they're doing, it fails to scientifically meet the requirements to be described as sex. Their pervert love, their degenerate pervert coitus that they engage in, and all the unnatural forms that it might come, they have to parade it around. I mean, we as heterosexuals have families, and we're very proud of them. We go to swim meets, and we watch them and support them in their track events, and we do all the things that parents proudly do, but we don't feel the need to wave our sexuality around in a parade. We feel very confident and socially comfortable about our sexual circumstances, and we don't feel the need to overcompensate and to make other people feel uncomfortable about whatever we do in private, right? So, look, guys, this is a war of America's future, and this is the second Civil War. And of course, it's going to be asymmetrical, and it's going to break down along lines that won't involve rolling around horse cavalry with swords. I mean, they might have swords. Who knows? Who knows what will really happen after their ammo runs out, right, guys? But it looks like the Homeland Security, I guess their ammo won't run out, right? So the eventuality of conflict here is almost virtually unavoidable at this point. And who knows how that really will take place, or what will be the first shots fired at Fort Sumter in this new American conflict. But you can see that 85-90% of the country, land mass, and people, and cities and towns and counties and states in this entire union are being held hostage by this minority 15% super elite, super wealthy, globalist, billionaire, jet-setting, big tech controlling, right? Washington Post owning cabal of traders, and they really got to go. They got to go bye-bye, right? And there's a small number of them, and they control a lot of the nodes, a lot of the points of, as gatekeepers, right? A lot of the points of control over our lives. They have a lot to say about, how our bank accounts can, et cetera, right? But we have to work around that, guys. We have to be like our forefathers, our original principled philosophical predecessors in idea and in flesh, right? Our actual forefathers would resist and would find a way to stow our goods on the side and get independent from the, right? Declaration of Independence from the American Federal Reserve System. And that's what it's all about, guys. It's all about finding a way to survive the tyranny that these psychos are going to try to rain down like hell on all of us, right? They're going to try to rain down hell on us in all the different forms that will come. And you can see that if they're able to steal this next election and destroy Donald Trump, then they're not going to stop there, right? They're going to continue to round us all up, all the supporters, right? They already went after Rudy Giuliani and a bunch of other just people standing around in the Trump organization and just try to destroy. Like we're going to play the segment of John Eastman on here, and describing how serious this tyranny is going, right? How serious that the farmers out there in the Midwest are getting shut down. You can see that you can't barely have a farm with a couple of cows before the local government and the feds will come over to shut your property down and take your animals, and right. So this is just the beginning, quiet opening salvo of the war against America and the beginning of this process of this starvation famine campaign. Later on, we won't be able to be like, what happened? Where did all the food go? They're out there shutting down farms everywhere, especially the small farms, who are really the ones who are growing and developing, and whose backup production is supporting their own families and their own neighbors around them, but also that backup production supports the production of the large growers. So they're dismantling farming in this country. They have their eyes on it as Bill Gates goes over there to buy up all the extra food land, buy all the extra farmland, right? So they can grow fake meat or whatever, or microbe soft, right? They can put microbes in the meat. They can make sure you get your mRNA dose in the meat, whether you like it or not. So these people are completely insane. They're not coping with death very well, right? They don't have any future golden parachute escape plan after they go into the grave, right? They're done. And so they're going to act out irrationally, and they're going to use all their power and the incredible wealth that they've accumulated in their evil lives to try to annihilate the rest of us here before they, that's just part and parcel of the megalomaniacal globalist insanity, right? And of course, they don't believe in any absolute truth, right? So they can convince themselves that men can have babies and that the rest of the population should think these kind of depopulation thoughts, right? Keep thinking depopulation thoughts, guys. No kids, right? You can't have any kids. AOC said that the earth is going to be boiling, and you can't have a baby in a boiling pot, right? That's the kind of AOC absurd, asinine, stupid speak you get from AOC. And a lot of women are going to listen to that, right? So the numbers of new births are going to continue to precipitously drop. And of course, China's starting to get a clue on that. They're starting to, maybe make sure that everybody's doubling up on kids now, right? They changed their policy entirely. So they used to be in line with the New World Order, but now they're not, right? They used to be in line with the World Economic Forum master plan of world slavery, but now they're not. They're pro-China, right? China first. Make China great again. That's what they're saying. Of course, those are thoughts we're not allowed to think, right? We have to stick over here with our depopulation thoughts, right? Have some more abortion, have some more vaccines, right? Humans are dirty. So here we go, guys. It's another wonderful episode of Looking Glass Forum. I'm glad you've returned. Once again, you really have a choice. Let's face it, everyone else out there is just so drab and they're so stuck up in their like weird quasi-ideological subspectrums, right? And they really can't escape saying the same thing like a broken record every single day. And we're gonna change it up. We're gonna discover some new things here, guys. We're open-minded over here. We're gonna go forward here and listen to all the people that you wouldn't think that we would listen to. And we're going to dig out the grains of truth and the gems amongst the rocks there. Right? We're going to discover the truth no matter what. And we're not going to just quiet the dissent. We're not going to insist that people do certain things to meet our standards and our expectations and our presuppositions, right? You don't have to be expected to get down and pray to Allah 5 times a day. You're not expected to whip out your rosary here and to flash it at people, like a lightsaber, right? No, all we want you to do is be open-minded and think about the actual matter-of-fact, mechanical, dry, factual basis of the truth. That's what we're trying to get at here. And so we're not going to get into emotionalism. We're not going to continue on in a giant herd, continue to do things that are totally idiotic or unsound, right? Just because the rest of the group is doing it, right? Just because everyone is a mass majority all gets together and does it like this. Once we discover the truth and we find out that the actual basis of those large-scale practices are not sound or are just based on unclean pagan traditions, let's say, and not on the gospel of Jesus Christ, then we're going to be sure to remind you of that. So once again, thank you for coming back.
Your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
So, Dr. Eastman, I'm going to ask you about the fringe, but, no offense, guys like Ludig and tribes held up on the left that he's supposed to be in the Supreme Court. Ludig was a guy who was always on the short list, never got there, supposed to be a genius. You got Conway every night on CNN or wherever he is. He was a partner at Wachtell Lipton. And part of the reason here, just so people know inside baseball, they're coming so hard because they want to back off the big law firms from representing anything to do with Trump. The big law firms will not take it on. They'll say, no, we can't do it. It's too controversial, and our clients will fire us, so we can't do it. So you can't get the big law firms, and you can't get those young, aspiring professionals, the lawyers who want to make either partner at a big law firm or white shoe law firm or want to go practice there. This is all the way they go on use information warfare and go on warfare here. But I want to go back to the fact of the essence of this. Is what you proposed fringe when attorney generals of some of those powerful states in the union were writing this and taking it to the Supreme Court and trying to get standing and doing all these things, and the Electoral Count, the Electoral Count Act of 1887, they absolutely changed it radically and slipped that into a spending bill so it didn't have to be seen in broad daylight. What happened was what you argued. At the end of the day, a fringe theory that you went outside the bounds of what a lawyer in our advocacy system would not take on and advocate for their client, sir.
Absolutely not. In fact, there was historical precedent: 1796, 1800, 1817, 1837, 1857, 1876, 1960, where vice presidents were asserting authority to resolve disputes over electoral votes. Whether that's correct or not remains an open question. It's never been addressed by any court, by the Supreme Court or otherwise. But one thing's very clear from the founding: the founders did not want Congress having the final say in the choosing of the president. That would destroy separation of powers and turn us into a parliamentary system of the kind we had just rejected. So whether the vice president had that authority or not, it was clear that Congress did not. So all of my recommendations were based on that central fact. The second thing is, and Judge Ludig, my former boss, he gave a speech down at the University of Georgia Law School where he admitted he never even looked at the issues before he testified about it in Congress and had no idea there was even a dispute about this. That's disgusting ignorance when he's acting like he knows the answer to these questions and calling me out for being, quote, wrong at every turn when he hadn't even bothered to look at the scholarship or the historical evidence. So these are the kind of things we're dealing with. People have gotten so blinded by their visceral hatred of Donald Trump that they can't even see straight about legitimate legal arguments. Whether those arguments would have prevailed or not is immaterial. The question that they were legitimate questions about open matters of constitutional law. And as a lawyer representing a client, I had an obligation to zealously advocate that client, pressing legal theories that had any basis in merit, as mine all did. And the fact that Congress changed the Electoral Count Act to get rid of one of the clauses in the Electoral Count Act that actually confirmed my views that the legislatures had authority to deal with this issue if their rules on the election were not followed. They got rid of that because that gave support for my position. Now, they got rid of it in the dark of night, as you said, and they made the Electoral Count Act, which, as you pointed out, is unconstitutional. It's a usurpation of powers that is not given to Congress. They made it worse, but they got rid of even the one provision in the old Electoral Count Act that supported my position. I mean, it's just, and yet, but for advancing those perfectly valid, even if wrong, and I don't think they're wrong, but even if they were perfectly valid and reasonable legal theories that states' attorneys generals from around the country also adopted, that the notion that is a disbarable offense is going to give vindication of the efforts by the 65 Project, one of whose leaders said our goal is not just to have all these attorneys disbarred, but to make them so toxic in their firms and their communities that right-wing legal talent will never want to take on these kind of legal challenges again. That will clear the path for election fraud and election illegality for as far as the eye can see, and that's what their goal is.
This is the key point. This is what they're trying to do back. Okay, one of the things that's very disturbing in the judges, what she's saying, this thing about when the government deems or the government says it's holy writ. Is that the same mentality we had when the government lied to us for years and years and years about the Vietnam War? Was this the same that the government lied to us about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Was this what the lies they told us about the advancements we were making in Afghanistan? I mean, what is this concept? If the government says it's holy writ, and everybody has to kind of bow down to that, what kind of radical interpretation is that, John Eastman?
It's an authoritarian. It's Orwellian. Remember Orwell, who 75 years ago this year published 1984. He had the argument right. He had the year wrong. He was 40 years off. But when the government said 2 + 2 is 5, not only are you obligated to repeat it, but you are obligated to believe it. That was the mission. And you were going to be tortured, persecuted by folks from the Ministry of Love if you didn't sign on to the government's lie. That's what we're dealing with here. Bill Barr said without any evidence that there was no evidence of fraud. They didn't do the investigations that he claimed they did. The head of CISA said that this was the most secure election in our nation's history. That was laughable. We had already had evidence at the time that inside the votes had been flipped from Trump to Biden up in Antrim County, Michigan. We've now had audits that show that there is source code and this was introduced in the U.S. Supreme Court just last week, source code in the election software that the decryption code key was available in raw data without being encrypted. And anybody could go in that had access to the source code, change the results, alter the logs, and then back out. This is the kind of stuff we're dealing with. And the government says, oh, no, don't look at what you're seeing here. It can't be true. And you better bow down to what we're saying or we're going to destroy you.
When we talk about a criminal probe being started, let me go back to Bill Barr to be very blunt and very specific about a guy that's a bald-faced liar. He told the president in the Oval Office, he told people, he's been up publicly, there was no voter fraud at all. He checked, he had the local U.S. attorneys in these districts check. The Epoch Times, 2 years after that, did a Freedom of Information and was allowed to contact all those field offices with U.S. attorneys. I think 10 of them or 8 of them, 9 of them came back and said there was no report, we did no study, we were not told to do anything, and we didn't do it. The only one that did was Philadelphia, and we know the U.S. attorney at the time was open and sent a letter to Barr to say, hey, there are major problems in here with these mail-in ballots. We've got a problem, we have to deal with it. And Barr told him to stand down. That's what a bald-faced liar Barr is. John Eastman, we're going to have you back on here. We got your back. We know you got to turn around this document over Holy Week because, trust me, that crowd does not care about Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and particularly the resurrection of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ on Resurrection Sunday, Easter. We know you got to get to work. Eastman, where do we go to find out more about this, and where do people go to have your back, sir?
GiveSendGo.com/Eastman is my legal defense fund website. It's there on the link as well. People can go to that. They get updates, but they can also donate and, as importantly, send prayers because my wife and I read them.
Right. However, when you talk about the fight to take your country back, they have weaponized the law. Hello, the Bolsheviks and the Nazis knew what they were doing about crushing free people or crushing people. And that's what they used. It was actually the tip of the spear for a long time. That is what's going on in this nation. Mike Davis joins me. Mike, I realize you got a bolt, and I got a bunch of things to roll through. I got Eastman and Clark's disbarment, right? I've got all the stuff happening to Trump and the gag order. And then I've got this Kerry Lake situation out in Arizona. They're hitting this. I normally say we have a 30-front war on everything against the radical left. It's right now kind of the subset of lawfare is like a 30-front war because it's all over the country in every jurisdiction, in every courthouse right now. Mike Davis.
Well, I would say this is outrageous what they are doing to John Eastman in California. He is a very serious attorney. He went to the University of Chicago, one of the top law schools in the country. He has his PhD. He clerked on the Fourth Circuit. He clerked for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, one of the most coveted jobs you can get as a young attorney. He was a dean of a law school. And the fact that these Democrat operatives and these Democrat judges are trying to disbar him for advancing a legal theory is extremely dangerous. It is very dangerous to try to punish an attorney for advancing what you call a fringe legal theory. Remember, Thurgood Marshall argued that courts should ignore the Supreme Court's controlling precedent of more than 50 years, Plessy versus Ferguson. And Thurgood Marshall did not get disbarred. In fact, he got put on the Supreme Court of the United States because he won Brown versus Board of Education, a landmark case. If you agree with the case, you call it landmark, and apparently if the Democrats don't like the argument, if they disagree with the case, they call it fringe, right? And so it is outrageous that this is happening to John Eastman. Think about it this way. If you're going to disbar John Eastman for pushing a legal theory that has been advanced in the past, that Congress even contemplated amending the Electoral Count Act of 1887 because it was ambiguous, and John Eastman was advancing a legal argument. They didn't contemplate. Hang on. They didn't contemplate. They slipped it in. They changed the Electoral Count Act of 1887. This is how fringe it is. The Senate changed the Electoral Count Act of 1887. That's how fringe it is, and slipped it into an omnibus bill so it could not be debated. They realized that's how huge this deal was, right? And this gets right back to it's not fringe what John Eastman was arguing. It's central, and they wouldn't have covered up in the dead of night to change the Electoral Count Act of 1887, sir. You're exactly right. You're exactly right, Stephen. I'll say this. Remember this. Democrat attorneys pushed a fringe legal theory that they can disqualify President Trump under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. That fringe legal theory got struck down 9-0 by the Supreme Court of the United States, that recent Colorado case, right? Does that mean that these Democrat attorneys who pushed that fringe legal theory should face disbarment like John Eastman's former boss, Judge Ludig, who's completely lost his mind, like Lawrence Tribe up at Harvard Law School, who's also completely lost his mind, like these other Democrat lawyers and judges and operatives? Should those 4 justices on the Colorado Supreme Court get disbarred? Should Judge Sarah Wallace get disbarred? I mean, it is obscene that they are disbarring John Eastman for zealously representing his clients. This is a First Amendment violation. This violates so many constitutional rights: the right to speak, to associate, to redress government, due process of law, effective assistance of counsel. These people should be, look, when President Trump is back in the White House, and his Justice Department must open a criminal probe on this Democrat lawfare and election interference. This is a conspiracy to interfere in the election illegally, which is a crime, as the Democrats are pursuing against every Republican they can find. It's also a crime to conspire to violate Americans' civil rights, and that's exactly what the Democrats are doing. And it's not just Trump. It's Trump, his top aides like Hugh Bannon, like Peter Navarro, his attorneys, both inside the administration like Jeff Clark, his outside legal advisors like John Eastman, his January 6th protesters, parents outraged by gender chaos in schools. This is lawfare. These are republic-ending tactics by the Democrats, and there must be legal, political, and financial consequences. Criminals. Criminal probes. Got to be, when you're viceroy, criminal probe.
Here's just a quick reminder, guys, of our sponsor, WendysLimited.com. Wendy'sLimited.com has all the hottest new styles, all the most incredible boutique fashion designers available to you. And of course, we're all American, and we're all about making America great again at Wendy'sLimited.com, guys. Wendy'sLimited.com. So really at the outset of this project here that we over here at Looking Glass Forum, all our compatriots are just working hard to press forward, in an economy where we're having diminishing returns, right, on our paychecks, inflation, and all the downward pressures you can see with people, with our enemies, our adversaries. These elite billionaire globalist cutthroats are working hard to push all kinds of invaders, illegal invaders, into America in order to cause all the chaos and instability that you see taking place as the result, as the weapon of warfare, as the undermining of the earth beneath our very feet, and the jobs and the job market gets more chaotic, and the pressures are there, obviously, on the wages are not going to go up, and so your over printing of billions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, right, and sending it over all over the world, out of the country, not to build a bridge, not to secure the border, not to give all of our law enforcement and military and first responders a massive raise in order to attract the best and the brightest, right? Nothing like that. Not to print out trillions of dollars of our own money that we have to ultimately pay back because we're getting into credit, right? You understand that. That the Federal Reserve System was a system of credit when America was out of money. America was totally destitute. In 1929, of course, the system was brought into place in 1913, naturally. Jekyll Island, right? All the banking interests, Warburg, and et cetera, et cetera. Just look it up yourself, You have to go back and figure that out. You don't have time to go back and help along the stragglers, right? You have to ultimately come to this understanding of what's really going on. No one's going to tell you. So by 1929, when we have this absolute crash, everyone's calling in for the margins, right? Margin calls. No one has any money, and everything just collapses like a house of cards overnight. Millions are going to starve, and it's the untold story of America's Great Depression. It was the end of America's national sovereignty and economic hegemony. And of course, the process of creating a new collateral, to keep the whole system going, right? Because, at that point we were bankrupt. You had to clear the playing board of anything of value. That's what would happen in 1938. They would come in and they would just remove all silver and gold coins from circulation, right? And they would replace it with this kind of questionable new, Federal Reserve looking fake greenback, right? Fake dollar, the Federal Reserve note, come into place. No more silver certificates, no more of notes of any value or hard currency of any value or hard money, right? Because all that would get removed to those who we were indebted to, because we're the debtors and they're the creditors. They control that. And they give us the monopoly play money, the confetti money we pass around to each other. And now that's ultimately going to, right, that's been defrauded, and they've sucked all the nectar and the juice out of that. So now the paper dollar isn't even worth a red cent, right, of what it used to be. Right, we all kind of understand the gradual devaluation over time. And so now they're going to try to lock us in this dreadful state as absolute debtors, total universal serfdom and indebtedness for all of our children forever, because they want to crystallize and permanently etch in stone our status as enslaved borrowers, right? We're just perpetual borrowers. We perpetually have to print out more money on the printing press that we have to somehow pay back, and we'll call it, quote unquote, I got my fingers up, taxes, parentheses, right? And of course the IRS has got to stand a little aside from all this, internal revenue service, but the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, can't really be internal, so we got to keep it overseas in Puerto Rico, right? Of course, the IRS, you do your research, the IRS's actual position in the world is founded, and its actual P.O. box in the end is situated in Puerto Rico, so that it's outside, even though it has offices here and there in the U.S., its actual corporate heading is situated outside of the United States, right? So the whole process of getting us to this bankrupt state in 1929, taking all of our actual money, in 1938, I believe, and getting us into World War II, etc., has been about putting into place a system, a technotronic system of serfdom that requires the American, no longer the Floridian, no longer the New Yorker, no longer the private citizen of your state, but now you're a public American citizen. So the citizenship standards would change too over time, as we talked about, and were reversed and turned upside down. In the same way that before the Civil War, the citizenship of every individual in the United States was based on their state, just like how you have a state birth certificate. Well, originally, we didn't have to have birth certificates. We didn't have to certify any live birth to the state. That's some kind of law. Every single birth has to be enumerated and serialized with a custom number and stamped. Get a little baby print of his foot on the with the ink footprint on the, everything is expropriated and monetized and hypothecated. So you're part of the hypothecation now. That's what happened. The individual citizen, the actual person with the soul, the human being, has now been hypothecated as collateral within the system. That's why you have to have a birth certificate and a social security number to technotronically monitor and quantify every single thing you do. Before, natural Americans, natural humans, weren't enumerated in the system with some kind of birth certificate. Right, so this whole process of getting us into this enslavement began in the 1860s. We had the Civil War. We ran through right? That was just the warm-up. Everyone likes to talk to the Rothschild bankers. The Rothschild bankers were selling weapons to the North and the South at the same time through different banks. So some of the banks they were using were in France and some of them were in England, right? Supporting both sides of the war. So you got to understand the big picture, that this process of bringing America deliberately down into this individual enslavement, this personal, individual, have your own name in all caps, like a corporate document, like a corporate entity. That's what we always talk about the Federal Reserve note. If you look at it, if you take a dollar bill out and look at it, every real official corporate document has to have the title of the document at the very top in all capital letters. And so that's why it says Federal Reserve note in all capital letters. If you look back in time and you go look at the old silver certificates, it would just say silver certificate in regular English, right? It didn't have to be all caps. It wasn't a official corporate document that the printing out of those Federal Reserve printers, right? They're private banking instruments. They're owned by the Federal Reserve. They're meant to be sent out as an IOU and then sent back and pulled back in through the IRS and through your local courthouse, which sucks in all of your dollars and money. Every time you put money into a postage stamp or you put money into a parking vendor for the city, the money pours out at the top and it sucks back in at the bottom like a drain, guys. And in between there, you owe it. You owe it in between. In between all that's taking place there, you owe the sum for everything they're printing out. And it didn't used to be that way. It did not used to be that way at all, guys. We used to have banknotes. There weren't debt notes. We used to be in the black ink. We used to have gold and silver money, which is intrinsically value, and it can't be a black hole of debt in itself. Just like our American, not Florida, not New York, not Pennsylvania, not California debt notes. These are American Federal Reserve debt notes, right, over the whole nation. So we're the only ones who are on the hook to pay it back, guys, because we have Social Security numbers, and we're the ones who are supposed to vote and send up our representatives to give permission. But of course, they're over here saturating the populace with illegal votes, watering down our pure American vote and will of determination with these fraudulent systems and fraudulent ballots and fraudulent voters, destroying us that way. They're getting us coming and going, too. Because not only that, they're also printing out the print machine so that it's just all the gears in the printing machine are white hot, about to melt down, because they're printing out so much money as fast as possible that we can never pay it back. At the same time as they're bringing in the people to replace us, that makes it harder and harder to even have a chance to pay it back, to even work and pay taxes, right, and have the privilege of paying back all the money that we're borrowing. No, guys, we have to go up to Washington, D.C. and break the wheel. And because we have to do that, we're going to get into this issue of a civil war. Because, of course, the system itself is not going to allow itself to be broken. And the system itself has kind of merged with the left, with the old Confederate South, the slave owners of the South, right? The Knights of the Golden Circle. We will rise again. Right, and they somehow, over the course of time, by a mass psychosis and a mass manipulation, demagogic, rhetorical sorcery, like, Senator Byrd, right, the Klansman, right, because it all makes sense, because BLM, right, because somehow it makes sense to these people somehow, because of all the TikTok the flashing lights and the TikTok propaganda, everything makes sense to them. So the whole system itself, the whole system of globalist tyranny is merged with the left and is now trying to vaporize and put the rest of the nation on this conveyor belt to destruction, while Soros, pays more and more traitors to get up there and try to send us all to the guillotine. They're all the wrong people. Set all the criminals free and set the righteous men, the people with social security numbers most likely, who actually are responsible for paying for all this, send them to the guillotine or wherever. So yeah, we got our work cut out for us, guys. This is going to be a difficult, heavy lift, but really it doesn't even matter. I mean, this is what we were born for. I mean, it doesn't really matter what happens after what the final analysis really is. It only matters that we do our duty and intelligently, wisely petition our government for redress before it gets out of control. And because everyone else is talking about this, I heard the FBI talking about a civil war, a new civil war, right? Which is what they tried to precipitate on January 6th. And we're approaching this next January 6th, and God knows, right? Everyone on their knees. Lord, give us the election of our choosing and not of their selection. Amen, right? So the point is that whatever happens next with this election is going to provoke the other side. And whether we want to go up there on January 6th and triumphantly wave our signs for Trump, who won, we're going to meet resistance there. And if Joe Biden and those scumbags try to rip it off again, and we have to go up there and redress our government for grievances, they already changed the law. The old law that Mike Pence should have pulled the trigger. He should have pulled the lever. He should have hit the button, right? He should have decided to ultimately defend America's democracy, but they walked up to him and put those things in his hand, those little chips and cards and little coins and those little things, and they put them in his hand and he slipped them in his pocket, and he's a traitor. He tries to come back and get up in front of us, and flies land on his weird, Ken doll, plastic hair. It's weird, right? And he tries to come back, but he's a Benedict Pence. He's Benedict Pence. And he can't come back, right? So that's what we're dealing with, guys. We're just totally, all of our enemies have surrounded us. And all of our betrayers. That's why we're so distrustful. We always ask, is Trump real? We have to actually consider that thought. Because of the duplicity here. We remember how duplicitous it was with everything that happened in World War II in Germany. I mean, we have to be thoughtful here, guys, and careful. And what choice do we really have? We're not presented with many alternatives here. So the situation is very dire. And I think that we have to discuss what happened, and not many people, not many thinkers or authors or, not many people will deliberately out loud discuss the possibilities of what might happen here if America's foundations are fractured here, and we allow these sycophant, weakling, pathetic little leftist worms, with their plastic shields and their black umbrellas, right? If we let these individuals topple our government, then we're just weak, pathetic, weak men who deserve it, right? So, not to say that violence is ever an answer. I mean, violence is just the result of all else failing. And we're Americans, so we're on the side of law enforcement, and we want to have our best and brightest out there, keeping our streets safe, and keeping our buildings from being torched, or right. I mean, we have our first responders, we have our system of society in place, and we defend that. And we know that things sometimes go wrong, but by and large, the system is there to protect us and everyone else. And those people who are going after the workers and the officers and the deputies and the EMTs, right? And and attacking the system itself these degenerates are the problem in itself. And so this is the expression of the symptoms of communism under the surface, and it's irrational, and it doesn't have to have a cohesive, meaningful, logical program. It has to have the deranged individuals, the useful idiots that will throw the Molotov cocktails and who will shoot the marbles and try to shoot out the cops' eyes, or they'll shoot the heavy-duty lasers that they get them from their labs, right, up at the university, right, just to let you know, up at the campus there, they get the lasers from there. So, I mean, those retarded crackheads down there, they couldn't, they're just sent up there with their mommy's Corvettes to college. They can't afford those lasers. I'm just putting that out there. But they get them from their chemistry labs or wherever. They come down, they try to beam the cops' eyes out with it, and we're all on the side of the cops at that point in the struggle. It doesn't matter who the individuals are. It doesn't matter how righteous or how dignified any of the personal stories or personal characters in the story are. We're just on the side of the principle, and we're on the side of the right. And so even at that time, we're on the side of the FBI. Can you imagine that? So that's how twisted and fallen we've come in America now, guys, as we've been unable to really correctly analyze and name the enemy, because it's slithered with its corrosion and its corruption all up into the different various institutions of our government. And you really, so the American people are being hit from all sides from a very small minority, and we're not able to deduce how to defend ourselves or how to fight back or resist this small cabal and the small conspiracy of leftist agitators and provocateurs and the apparatchiks here of this new neo-Bolshevik uprising, right? And it's threatening. It's very threatening. It's very dangerous. You can see the generals in the Pentagon cowed to it. You can see cardinals in the Vatican are cowed by it and placating it. You can see that people all over the world are being threatened by this new and climbing outbreak and fury of general rebellion against any cooperative, cohesive globalist structure, right? And of course, we here in America, despite wanting to not be controlled and terrorized and depopulated and poisoned by our elite overlords in globalism, despite that, America's current financial and economic greatness in the world lay dangerously, right? We're walking on the thin ice. We're dangerously on the edge of absolute destruction because of the place that we've been led to by all these NAFTA agreements in the past, right? We talked about that each of these different international globalist agreements seems to get worse and worse. We were critical of Trump when he did the USMCA agreement, which just seems to be blowing up in our face now. It's despicable. It's despicable how they get to take advantage of the United States, and then they get to threaten us all with their hordes and hordes of endless mutated masses, these trolls, right? The hordes of trolls that are pouring over, that are not here for anything other than just the attraction, like vultures to a dead carcass, attracted to the spoils, right? To what the spoils that might be taken here. And that's what the international elite and the globalists are expecting. So here we don't have much more time as a nation and a people to get our heads right, and we don't have very many people here who will really discuss this. So here we're going to just kind of close out our episode with this interesting and fascinating discussion by this young man these are the individuals who we have to kind of start to pay attention to, who will just be able to ask the hard questions and don't really have anything to lose or to gain, right? Just being whimsically curious and Neflex reaction truth that tries to ultimately look in the tea leaves and evince for us all a sense of what is about to occur in the world. And so these prognostications are very dire indeed. So let us now hear this interesting discussion about the Civil War and the collapse of civility in America and the probabilities of this election debacle leading to civil war.
I've been predicting America will have a civil war or revolution since 2020. Back then, this sort of thing appeared distant, like something you would read about in a history book. The scary thing is that now it's real. My friends at the Stitch and Adams podcast like to say wars like this go from people LARPing to until they stop and the LARPing turns real. Hitler was LARPing conquering Eastern Europe. The communists were LARPing revolution, and the American South was LARPing secession. It's all fun and games until the Nerf guns get replaced for AR-15s. The scary thing now is that there have been a series of horrifying events that only make sense in a context of a society that's about to have a civil war. The most recent example is Texas saying the federal government has abandoned its duty to the nation by letting millions of immigrants cross the Mexican border, and Texas won't take it anymore. Now half the states in the country have supported Texas, and 10 have offered to send troops to help protect Texas. Maine and Colorado tried to take Trump off the ballot, and New Mexico tried to ban guns. These are all things in which the only previous precedent in our nation's history was the last Civil War. The last time states bucked the central government in this manner, or states took candidates from the main opposition party off their ballot, was 1860. That's not a good sign. For a bunch of reasons, I think that we'll start having violence over the next year. I don't think American society can make it through the 2024 election without collapsing into civil war. We might not even have that much time, if I'm being honest. Part 1. Deciding factors. On this channel, I have multiple long videos talking about why America might have a civil war and what sort of context informs it. The shortest answer I'll use to summarize it here is that there are very clear patterns which predict when societies have revolutions or civil wars. Peter Turchin is a great model which 10 years ago predicted America would have a civil war. His computer model has predicted the Russian Revolution, French Revolution, Roman Civil Wars, Black Death, or the religious wars of the 17th century to the exact periods they took place in based off 3 variables. Those being elite overproduction, or how many people are competing for elite jobs, low average wages, and inequality. These 3 factors predict revolutions and civil wars, given that once 80% of the population is poor and has no incentive to cooperate, it means that society falls apart. This then results in a situation in which different factions split up among the population, since the mainstream is failing. Over history, this has been the whites and reds, North and South, Armagnacs and Burgundians, or Lancasters and Yorkists. In each case, these factions represented sub-demographics of the population trying to take over. In ours, this is the college-educated left versus non-college-educated right. As I explain here in this text wall, every single policy the left pushes benefits the college-educated, giving them jobs and power. Meanwhile, the opposite is true for the right, which stands for the military, business, and religious interests who don't base their social status off college degrees. I would highly recommend the book Leviathan and Its Enemies by Samuel Francis. It's one of the best political books I've ever read, where Francis was a conservative who, in this book, was doing a Marxist class analysis of modern society. It talks about how the college-educated, or the managerial class as he calls them, dominate society, and thus the left dominates all the institutions. As a general rule, you can predict if someone is right or left-wing based off how much agency they have in their work. Anyone who works in a large bureaucracy will tilt left, and anyone who has agency in their work, even if they're poor like small business owners or farmers, will tilt right. Our society is managed by vast impersonal bureaucracies, so the left can manage all the large institutions, whether Hollywood, the media, Wall Street, corporations, the high ranks of the military, the churches, presidency, government bureaucracy, and tech. One of the ways I hone my predictive abilities is to look backwards over history to see what people were accurate in predicting the future. Then I try to figure out what things they did right and use it myself. There are some absurd examples. I do wonder how much of this is on a purely intuitive level that we don't understand. Like there was a book 100 years ago that said the Lord of Mars would be called the Ilona. Another book written in the 60s, and here's a text wall because it got a lot of stuff right, said that in 2011 America would have its first black president named Abomi. However, there are about 5 other theories of history besides Turchin's which converge on America having a civil war in the 2020s. You have Goldstein, which in the 70s looked at economic factors saying America will have a major war in the 2020s. This is one of the worst written books I have ever read, so please thank me for reading it for you. Then the Strauss-House system in the 90s predicted America would have a civil war in the 2020s due to generational patterns. Also, authors like Amaury de Réaucourt in the 60s thought in the 21st century America would have a period of civil wars and Caesarism like the late Roman Republic. With all of these factors together, I can say it's probable that we'll have another civil war soon. I want to be clear that I'm not sure what type of conflict this will be. I do think the right would win given it gives the best incentives to young men who fight wars while the left hates them. The left also hates martial traits like aggression, discipline, hierarchy, duty, or honor. The left is split into a bunch of city-states, while the right has a single geographic region. Enlisted men and officers in the military tilt right, while the left has the top brass of the leadership. All food, oil, and manufacturing production is in conservative areas. For all of these reasons, I think the right has a very large advantage over the left. That being said, it's hard for me to get further than that. The world is chaotic, and one of my catchphrases is that I'm betting against God. What that means is that there are a million ways to be wrong and only a handful to be right. Almost all predictions of the future are wrong, and so will mine be. Anyone who claims any other standard is a charlatan. I have a solid amount of correct and incorrect predictions under my belt. Keep in mind, I'm a 22-year-old with no credentials. Listen to me at your own risk. The way the future works is that there are key moments in which seconds determine everything and change the future. World War I was like that, in which there are many timelines where the Central Powers win, and that completely changes the rest of the century. Also, at the start of World War I, there were a series of decisions which decided everything. You could have seen a war without Britain as an example. The problem is it's impossible to figure out which of these die rolls will turn out, as in most cases, there are about 7 different options that all have a less than 20% likelihood. So it's really difficult to figure out which 20% shot's going to happen. I'm certain that in the next year we'll have a handful of these die rolls. My friends like to stress out the future here, and what I tell them is that we've done everything we can to prepare. I say I'm not going to worry more until I see what those decisive moments are and what's going to happen next. And until then, I have no idea what's going to manifest. The exact form in which this war starts is incredibly important. In retrospect, whether this turns into a civil war, revolution, or international war will be obvious, but it won't be to us. For example, slight tilts in the military's loyalty will determine how the war goes. If almost all of the military defects to the right, it'll be like the French Revolution, where the right just slaughters the left. Otherwise, if it's more, it could be like the previous American Civil War, being a real war with campaigns that take years, as the military is balanced. A situation in which the right could very easily lose is one in which there's a rebellion that's too early, which is very clearly illegal. What I know about the military is that they are thankfully loyal to the law. If the rightist rebels are very clearly in the wrong, the military, which in most cases tilts right, will just crush it. This would then make the entire right look like traitors. The left could use this to legally crush the rebellion in its entirety, using charges of insurrection. This is why I've told the right repeatedly to not rebel out of the blue. The left's greatest trick is baiting the right into hazard. The left's psychology is female and the right's is male. Women will do low-level aggression much more than men. They lie more, spread more rumors, insult more, and non-violent action. Men tend to go from 1 to 10, in that guys are either friends or they're beating the crap out of each other. I think the left is trying to agitate the right so much so that the right has to do something crazy so that the left can get a consensus that the right is dangerous. We all need to be very careful over the next year. For normal people, keep your eyes open for when these decisive shifts might happen. If you're a blue person in Texas or a red person in California, try to figure out when a good time would be to get out for your own safety. Lots of death happens in civil wars, and people hate the other side. Think of all the Jews in Poland in 1939 who considered fleeing, then thought of how all their family, work, and friends were there. They then died at Auschwitz. It was so horrible they couldn't predict it, but that didn't stop it from happening. This also all happened within living memory. For people in power watching, be careful of traps that the other side might be placing. You have the weight of history on your shoulders. For all of us in these hard times, we must do our duty and stay honorable. My father said to me growing up, "Rudyard, there are certain hills that you have to die on to be a man. At the end, you will be judged whether or not you stood where you needed to stand." Part 2. Our emotional state. Something we forget in this day and age is that human societies are living, breathing things, since they're filled with living, breathing people. Societies experience the same emotions and mental illnesses that individuals do. A great failing of our society is that we need a spreadsheet or scientific study to say what's obvious to anyone with a supple mind. It's obvious that America is a better country than Mexico, given tens of millions of Mexicans immigrated here, and the reverse didn't happen. If a guy is charging you with a machete, you should be scared. The thing is that if you just look outside, it's obvious to me that we're about to have a civil war. This is kinda cringe since the worst people say this, but I think I might be an empath. I can't help but pick up on the emotions of the people around me. When I'm in a city, I can feel a certain vibe based off that city. When I speak before a crowd, I feel that it has an energy that I can almost play like a musician. The thing is that the vibes today are absolutely horrible. Far worse than they have been at any previous point in my life. I've stopped going to major cities anymore since the vibes are just too bad. It feels like nails on a chalkboard. Everyone's depressed. Everything's deteriorating, the air feels like tar. If I'm honest, nature, away from the human world, is where I find solace now. I have 2 friends who are professional experts in body language and language usage. They say that the language and actions now show that we will have a civil war soon. There's so much pent-up negative emotion now that needs to go somewhere. It's a natural biological reaction like crying or throwing up. It arises naturally from the population. Bloodlust is spreading among young people across the political spectrum. Most of the most important leftist streamers have talked about how violence against the right is justified. Hillary Clinton literally said that Trump supporters needed to be put in re-education camps. Biden released a video on what we must do to save democracy and showed images of armed people. Whenever I log onto right-wing Twitter, the air and culture is just so insanely bloodthirsty. Appeals to humanity are kicked or stomped at. There is now literally a large segment of the population who are basically theocrats or fascists. The irony is that there were none of these even 3 years ago, but the left calling everyone Nazis made people think, why not? It's better than being on the left. For people not involved, I can't overstate how bloodthirsty Twitter is today. I read the comments section of every political video I watch and tweet threads for different political subcommunities. I do this since I want to keep a pulse on whatever is going on at any given time. From looking at this, things are really bad. People are just seething. For some reason, the Israel war is driving people really crazy. I'm not sure why, we're not involved, and as an Anglo-American, I'm not sure what this war means to me. However, people have a tremendous amount of emotion about it. People are going to say the internet's not real life, but that's kind of not true anymore. For a lot of people, they spend more time on the internet than in the actual interpersonal social world, especially for the young people who would fight this war. And people LARP and basically say crazy stuff on Twitter, but the problem is those people are meeting up and they will become the next generation of rebels. The people talking crazy stuff on Twitter, the thing is they actually believe it. When the nice guy at work posts insane stuff on the internet, what you're seeing on the internet is who he actually is. The guy at work is a facade. A big trend I've seen is the breakdown of a shared narrative. Everyone I see or talk to follows at least one bizarre conspiracy theory, has some bizarre unhinged takes, and I think that probably includes me. Try to find a single celebrity who hasn't said anything insane. What this means is the breakdown of a shared political consensus, or the biggest thing that prevents civil wars. The political Overton window today compared to 10 years ago, back then everyone would think that we're insane. What I see is regularly some of the most unhinged, retarded takes. People will just say stuff completely unsubstantiated in fact. I often see people say Hitler was really the good guy. One of my boomer friends joked that for guys in my age group, it's worse to be called a normie than a Nazi at this point. I'm a big fan of Healthy Gamer GG, who gives psychological advice. He has a great video on burnout. Burnout is when it feels like you're not getting ahead, and it always starts long before people realize it. Burnout often is taking over someone for months before it completely destroys them overnight. The first big trait in burnout is loss of empathy. Once you hear about someone else's suffering and you just don't care. I've tested this. I've made Twitter and YouTube posts about empathizing for others. People just tell me to fuck off. Our society is so tired of empathy. We don't care about anyone else's struggles except our own, since life is so hard. I sympathize. This has also been gradually happening to me too. Something I'd like to point out is that empathy is not what most people think it is. Most people, when they hear empathy, think about sympathy, which is feeling sorry for someone, rather than what empathy actually means, which is the ability to put yourself in someone's shoes and mentalize them. Bismarck was very high in empathy, and he used that to win 5 wars by mentalizing his enemy's strategies. Empathy is generally always good. Our society is very high in sympathy, which often makes us act in a stupid way, and actually very low in empathy. Let me give an example. I'll say Gen Z has it rough. Lots of older generations will say that's not the case. Gen Z has it easy. I disagree, but that objection from older people doesn't actually come from thinking of Gen Z itself. It's coming from them thinking, my life is hard, those Gen Z have it worse. The reality is both millennials and Gen Z can have it rough, without negating how rough the other one has it. Another example is I've said men have oppressed women over history. Right-wingers have rejected that. The thing is, I agree with the right that the whole history of gender relations is not oppression. It's due to the often biological differences between men and women. However, I can't write off foot binding, widow burning, or female genital mutilation as okay. Men have oppressed women over history from time to time. However, that would involve saying your enemies are correct at least a little bit. This is what a complete lack of empathy looks like. It's also what tribalism tribalism looks like. We've fractured into tribes. I test people socially from time to time. People have lost the ability to admit any fault on their side and saying anything good about the other side. This weakens our strategic abilities by making us irrational. If you tell a leftist that Trump was a good president on foreign policy, they'll have an aneurysm. I see this on the left too, like SNL or The Atlantic protecting Harvard in its unsavory issues with anti-Semitism and plagiarism. No one is willing to hold their own side accountable. A society this divided does not exist as a society. It's socially already in a civil war. Our society is horribly burnt out due to a litany of factors which mostly narrow down to desperation and being tired of ennui. The last 3 years since COVID have been brutal for everyone, and you've seen our society go completely crazy due to it. This period has just left everyone completely numb. It's been a barrage of insane news, hopelessness, with economic issues, the elites lying and gaslighting us, while 2/3 of men are single and most people are desperately lonely. The point where I see the general zeitgeist is they just can't bear it anymore. We're getting to the point where a large part of the population needs a civil war so they don't kill themselves. Authors over the 20th century have often asked the question, how can people kill others so easily? This was since they believed that there had been tremendous progress, and then the world devolved into the horrors of the world wars, perpetuated by the most advanced countries in the world. Meanwhile, Germany, considered to be one of the most civilized and enlightened countries in the world, committed one of the worst atrocities ever through the Holocaust. The short answer is that we humans are a lot more primal and savage than we imagined. Civilization is a tiny veneer to a very deep savagery that's right underneath the surface. We as humans naturally like killing. We evolved to enjoy it. We're tribalistic by nature, and everything else is a very thin aberration. We know this to be true since the group which tried to remove tribalism has now become the most tribalistic demographic in society. We're reverting back to who we really are. What I'm trying to convey is that on an emotional, intuitive basis, I don't think we can last much longer. We're bursting with so many emotions that we can't survive as a unified country for 5 years. Part 3. Normie Mindset. I've said before that the impulse that pushes us to violence is fundamentally biological. It's like being thirsty or angry. A problem here is that different sub-demographics of the population have very different self-interests in this situation. This combined with tribalism creates vastly different attitudes among different parts of the population at the exact same time, which aren't communicated with any other parts of the population. One of the things you hear about pretty often in history books, so much so that it's become almost a trope, is that when the revolution starts, the elite has no comprehension that it could possibly occur. I often hear stories of the Chinese emperor locked in his palace, secluded among eunuchs, bureaucrats, and harem girls, only realizing the empire is doomed as Mongols or rebels scale the walls. Growing up, I thought we were better than that, but we're not. Over the last year, I've seen the rise in what I call normie mindset. For older people, the term normie is what young people call people who are too normal. It's a term of contempt for those who have no clue about the things actually going on in the world. This is a group of people who reject that we will ever have a civil war, that it's just not going to happen. Some of my friends see this as a sign that things are getting better. I don't believe that. I think this is just a group of people who are able to completely ignore everything going on, but as things got worse, they had to come to terms with it. Instead of doing that, they just say nothing is going to happen even louder. The reason I say this is the normies never actually posit a reason why there won't be a civil war. I've never heard one of the normies posit an actual argument. We often take people's arguments seriously in this day and age, even when they don't really give us a reason to, or provide an argument for why we should take them seriously. However, an argument without an argument is just a rationalization. This is a group of people who can't imagine the idea of a revolution or civil war ever happening, so they reject the concept out of hand. Keep in mind that as things get harder, people cope harder because they can't deal with it. And so you get into this infinite cycle of people's lives getting harder and then them coping harder until things will get so bad they can't ignore it. The reason for this is that our society has been so peaceful that people emotionally can't get past the idea on a psychological basis. The irony, though, is that when a lot of the population thinks there can't be a civil war, is exactly the best time for a civil war. This is since when people can't take something seriously, they won't prepare for it, and thus it creates an incentive to rebel. If the establishment took this threat seriously, the revolution would look too difficult and people would give up, meaning it wouldn't hit critical mass. Our society suffers an enormous cultural amnesia problem. We can't remember or respect anything from before living memory. As those who fought in World War II die out, there stops being any concept that there can be large-scale violence on any level. I think it's unimaginable to a lot of people. The problem is that when you look back over history, violence is the norm, not the exception. The English-speaking world has had a major war like clockwork every 80 years, whether World War II, the American Civil War, the American Revolution, the Glorious Revolution, the English Civil War, and you could go further back. When you look back over history, you find that betting on long-term peace has horrible odds. A single lifetime might be peaceful, but the chances for an entire century are incredibly low. All the societies which had revolutions couldn't believe it at the time. As the Russian or French Revolution started, the elites were caught completely off guard. Look at how the elites weren't able to predict Trump at all in our era. People were surprised by World War I, II, or the American Civil War. Every era thinks they're special, and they're just not. If we want to do otherwise, that's crazy. Apocryphally, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing again and again and expecting otherwise. Look at these photos of Berlin, Paris, and Russia before their political insanities. Does this look like a society which is about to commit one of the worst atrocities ever? That's the problem with modernity. We have no conception of what human nature really is, so it constantly bites us in the ass. One of the things I find very surprising is that conservatives over the age of 40 seem to think the left is the most aggressive faction while the right is too cowardly and weak to fight. The great irony is that for under 40s, it's the exact opposite. Young men on the right have a visceral bloodthirstiness inside of them. It's exactly flipped while we see young leftists as weak and disorganized. The thing is that wars are fought by the young. The rebellion forming among young men, which I talk about in this video, is something completely new. It doesn't hold the old right in much esteem. In fact, most of the conservative leadership knows nothing about it. This new faction views most of the established conservatives as weak and decadent, let alone leftists, which it loathes completely. About a year ago, I predicted the rise of this faction, and people didn't believe me, and now they're here, right in front of us. The older people confuse the left's desire to protest with actual ability to fight. No young people on the left have the ability to fight at all. They don't own guns, they're inherently anxious, they don't have standards, and are entitled. They're not a new generation of fighters. They're the decadent court flunkies who wander around the capital of a collapsing dynasty before it gets destroyed. They hate having children, having their nation survive, hunting, or anything virile. The young people in the left belong to what is a suicide cult. The older people confuse the left's ability to organize and riot with actual military ability. This is a common historical pattern where the Marxists always riot and agitate, and then when the right organizes, it goes from a 0 to 100 immediately. This is what happened in Germany between the wars, Chile, Indonesia, Hungary, France, and so many other countries. The left is so much more emotional than the right, so they feel the need to LARP more. The problem is they're so idealistic that more often than not they get slaughtered by the right once it pulls its men together. The thing is that for young people, the lack of opportunities in absolutely everything, whether economic, sexual, political, social, and residential, is profoundly visceral. Older people can't understand it, and I already hear some objecting. But I swear this is a real issue, and if you don't hear it from me now, you'll hear it from the mob later. Gen Z is 90% less spending power than their parents. At least 70% of 21-year-old men are virgins. The ruling class doesn't care enough about the young to even acknowledge this, let alone do something about it. This applies both across the right and the left, which is why young people are so polarized. The fundamental reality is there's very little reason to not fight as a young man. They have their entire lives ahead of them. Once 80% of the population knows they're screwed, they're willing to roll the dice, even if theoretically half of them die, since that way there's at least some chance they'll get a better life where they can reproduce. Don't say this can't happen, since it's easily happened dozens of times before across history. I often see older generations say young men are unwilling to fight, and that's simply not true. The irony is that this condescension will be a big reason young men will fight. Young men in America have been continually spit on and insulted for their entire lives. They're treated like they have no value and they're worthless scum. Keep in mind, these are the descendants of the American Revolution, Civil War, Vikings, and conquistadors, not a society that takes oppression well. Another important point is that the political opinions of normies really don't matter. The political opinions which matter in civil wars are those of the organized people with weapons. It's normal in civil wars or revolutions for the most radical factions, which are only indicative of a tiny percentage of the population, to win, since they're the best organized and fanatical. We see this in England with the Puritans, in America with the radical Republicans, France with the Jacobins, the Nazis in Germany, or the Bolsheviks in Russia. In most cases, these groups were less than 3% of the population at the start of these wars, but punched above their weight to take over. People often say that Gen Z is too obese, cowardly, or lazy to fight. That might be true, but they're not going to get a choice. What will happen is that intelligent, well-organized, and fanatical political types inside Gen Z will organize and then conscript the weak. The weak won't organize and so won't have any leverage at all. In almost all revolutions or civil wars, most normal people want to just be left alone, but they don't do anything or organize, so small groups of radicals dominate politics and conscript the normies. Look at the English Civil War, in which people said before the war that the English had grown too weak and peaceful to fight. What happened instead was that the radicals conscripted the normies to fight. The English Civil War was mostly fought by apathetic people pulled off the bar floor or from small villages. This is what will happen here. Part 4. The Election. Our two political parties disputed the last two elections, either saying it's through election interference from Russia or due to mail-in ballots. The thing is that none of those tensions have been dealt with. When issues aren't solved, they pile up into something a lot worse. The country is also fundamentally much worse off than it was 4 years ago. Biden has imported 12 million illegal immigrants in the last 3 years. For a frame of reference for how insane that is, we had about 45 million illegals in the 45 years before that. It's hard to find good numbers, but I've seen some stuff saying the Biden administration has doubled the amount of money printing we were doing, which was already at ludicrous levels before COVID. 10 years ago, we had the highest debt in American history, and we've doubled it since. It wasn't until 1980 that the U.S. had $1 trillion of debt. We're now at $33 trillion. Our debt today is larger than our entire economy for the first time ever. Biden has added $6 trillion worth of debt so far. I'm not going to let Trump off the hook here, but he only added a much smaller amount of what Biden did, and it was also during a major international crisis, that was COVID, which Biden showed up after. For the first time in American history, we spend more money paying off the interest for our debt than the military. Keep in mind the interest rate is 3% of the total debt, so how are we going to pay the rest? The thing here is that I've been researching this video, and there's so much misinformation. For this litany of stats I just gave you, I don't know if that's true. I think at least some of that information's wrong, and I don't believe any of the stats coming out from the government. It just doesn't add up. I have a friend who's a professional statistician, and he was saying the standard of living has remained constant since COVID, and I said, that's insane. There's no way that can be true, because the cost of everything, food, has doubled since COVID, and there's no way in hell wages have doubled in that time. Talk to people, right or left, or go through the comment sections of videos which say the economy is good. The numbers the government is putting out are impossible. The elite is bald-facedly lying to us, and they think we're idiots who won't notice. I have 2 eyes, and I'm seeing the world. There's no way so many of the things they're talking about are true. However, the fact that we can't trust literally anything the elite says is a very sad fact about modern life. It wasn't true 10 or 30 or whatever years ago. If some of you don't agree, what can you trust in our society? Our corporations and media constantly lie. Academia has turned into ideological propaganda. It's hard to find any honest people in our nation today. The problem is the two parties literally cannot survive with the other party winning another term. For the Republicans, the financial policies and immigration drives the Biden administration are doing are rotting the country in real time. If Biden has another term and the policies he's pushing now will continue to destroy destroy the country. For the Democrats, they don't have a response to the Trump threat. Trump leads Biden massively. The left has gone very far left, meaning that they only pander to the managerial class. The Democrats are so desperate to take Trump off the ballot since they can't beat the threat he represents. They are importing millions of illegal immigrants since they want to make a docile, stable voting bloc dependent upon welfare. They're doing all of this out of insecurity. The problem is that the left has been gradually alienating larger and larger percentages of the population in order to keep their core fan base happy with them. The problem here is that the core leftist fan base is completely delusional, and so in order to keep their audience happy, the Democrats have to do things that destroy society, like printing vast amounts of money or taking in millions of immigrants to assuage the anxieties of the insane. The budget is a great example of this. We've only been barely able to pass a budget every few months. The thing is that each time we pass a budget, let's say there's a 20% chance things fall apart. However, once you take 10 of those shots, you're getting really high chances that the budget falls apart. If you look over history, the number one thing which causes these kinds of civil wars or revolution is budget issues, with the French Revolution being a really easy example. We can't kick this can down the road forever, but we don't have any other solution. Once things get like this, it only takes one time someone says fuck it and starts a war. What this all means is the US economy will go through absolutely horrible times in the future as our currency gets destroyed by the US filing for bankruptcy. The reason we'll do this is that we'll keep spending until we go bankrupt, or default given we're so addicted to easy money today. The problem with all of this spending is that the government printing money causes the rise in capital and inflation, which hurts the wages of normal Americans and increases inequality, as I explained in this text wall. The reason COVID was the most rapid increase in inequality ever is also the reason it was the largest amount of government money printing and welfare ever. This is why BlackRock can buy up all these homes and create ESG scores which completely dominate the economy. They're taking all the easy money from the government which naturally flows into the stock market. When you got your COVID payments, you spent them on Amazon, which went to their stock and thus into the stock market. This is how we can have a good stock market and economy on paper while everyone you know is broke or barely getting by. The problem is that across society, no one can afford to not have a civil war. With the way things are going, America simply can't sustain itself for another 4 years. For both the Republican and Democratic leaders, they will be better able to maintain power by starting a civil war than keep going. With another 4 years of Biden, Republican voters will want to secede. It goes the other way with Trump and the left too, where the left views him as a tyrant trying to destroy democracy. Something I've spoken about in previous videos, and especially this one, is the incredible similarities between the Roman and American empires. And if you want to look at the cycle of civilizations, the era which corresponds to us is the fall of the Roman Republic around 100 BC. And what happened then was that the Romans, who had all the same issues as us today, including inequality, political polarization, a large empire that they held reluctantly, and things such as the collapse of a middle class, Rome was divided between two political parties, the populist populares and the deep state elitist optimates. And what happened was that the Gracchi brothers were wealthy tycoons who became very politically popular through trying to revive the old Roman dying middle class, which was losing due to competition with slave labor from outside Italy. And they wanted to basically make Rome great again. Then what happened was that the optimates deep state tried to invalidate the Gracchis through saying that they were trying to make themselves dictators, take them off the ballot, and then they assassinated the Gracchis. But what happened after this was Rome spiraled into its civil wars, which killed the Republic. It's been said about World War I that it's a series of rational short-term decisions which ended up in madness. That's what's going to happen here. There will come a decision point where one faction decides to start the war, and then everyone will sit in complete shock that America is now divided and their sons must fight in the siege of Chicago now. When the English Civil War started, neither side was ready for it. They then took the first 6 months of the war building up armies to fight. I think this is the most likely option for us. America has a big and powerful military, but trying to figure out how it splits up will be a painful process. This is a pattern we've seen in each of the Anglo-Saxon wars, where the first few months of the war are building up armies by fundamentally unprepared people involved. This was the American Revolution, both World Wars, and the American Civil War. When all's said and done, the war will start, and after some time it will appear normal. You'll still have to wake up in the morning, eat breakfast, and do your job. Past a certain point, peace will feel strange. Do you remember a time when New York City hadn't been burnt down?
So here we are, guys. We're back with Wendy's Boutique, wendyslimited.com, wendyslimited.com, and the hottest boutique couture online, boutique supremacy online, Wendy's Boutique. So we've got to remind you guys, wendyslimited.com, our great sponsor. Please go and support her and support all the hardworking folks over there that are trying to bring you the best fashion design and designer brand name labels anywhere. So we just have to remind you that wendyslimited.com, wendyslimited.com is where you need to go.